Hey guys, what is going on? Welcome back to another Q&A episode here at The Shared Organics. So today we are going to be running through a bunch of questions related to cover crop and IPM. Now, these are two topics that I spoke about recently at the Boggy or Brisbane Organic Growers Inc. Group meeting this month, which you can find in full on my YouTube channel. The full talk is all on there. But after a few conversations with people, both during the event and afterwards, I thought I would collate a few of the questions that were most pertinent towards these topics and try and give you guys a little bit more of an insight or just touch on some questions that I actually missed in the presentation. And hopefully, we can answer a few of those a little bit better for you today. Now, don't forget, you can be joining me absolutely live. We have our friends live on TikTok at the moment who are here, and they are able to join in and ask questions and see the process behind filming here. So if you want to be available to watch these episodes behind the scenes and to be able to ask questions on the fly, then make sure you jump over to TikTok and follow me. I'm not going to give away too much as to when I'm actually doing these episodes. I can kind of give you a little leak here and there as to when I might be doing them. But if you're following along, you'll be able to be there quite quickly and you'll be able to jump in straight away and ask your question. So question one, we're going to relate to cover crops. If I only had space for one cover crop in a 4x8 bed, which would give me the most bang for my buck and why? Now, if I suppose we're talking, doesn't really matter whether it's 4x8 feet or 4x8 meters, but if you had one cover crop, now I'm interested in why you might have chosen one cover crop in particular. It's very, very easy to throw a little bit more of diversity in. One of the big takeaway factors from that talk about cover crop is that diversity is key. I guess if you really, really had to go something, one off really quickly, it depends on our goals. It depends whether we're wanting to fix nitrogen, whether we want some really fast growth to be able to add some green manure in between our main crops, or whether we actually want some root crops that are going to go down there and break up compacted soil. So it really does depend. I'd probably need a little bit more, but bang for your buck, you want fast growers. So you're going to be looking at things like grasses. You're going to be looking at things like buckwheat. I personally love clover. So if you've got a bit of a clover mix, that can completely cover and add lots of nitrogen to the soil. But really, diversity is key. So if you can get a few more in there, a few more of our different types of cover crops, then you're going to be on your way to success. Question two, can I grow cover crops between my tomatoes during the growing season, or will they compete too much? And this is something that I love doing. It's called a living mulch, so meaning that our mulch layer is living and it keeps regrowing as you're going through the season. Something like tomatoes works exceptionally well with our clover because tomatoes for the most part, depending whether they're determinate or indeterminate, will grow up as a vine or, as a nice bush, and it leaves room for an understory underneath. It works perfectly well paired with clover because clover does fix nitrogen into the soil in a plant available form, which allows the tomatoes to make the most of that and form those symbiotic relationships underneath the soil with the roots and the mycorrhizal fungi, and it can feed the tomato plant as we're going. It just mitigates a little bit of the need for constant feeding of a tomato, and it can help nature do a little bit as you go. Clover also flowers, so it can bring in some pollinators, which is also wonderful. And it does tend to stay relatively low, so something like that might be good. One to watch out for maybe is our beans. Typically, you can grow snow peas or beans up tomatoes, but it just means that you're going to be pulling apart different crops to find out which one's which, and you're going to get things climbing up each other. Same goes for something like a vetch, a hairy or woolly pod vetch. These things tend to just climb all over your main crops. So pick wisely when you're choosing something to grow alongside as a living mulch. Can cover crops help break up heavy clay soil, or is that just wishful thinking? Now, most of us in Brisbane, up here in Queensland, seem to be battling a lot of clay soil. Like personally, most of the properties that I've tried to work on do have, a bit of topsoil, and then we're hitting clay quite quickly. Cover crops with strong root systems, especially big, large tap roots, something like a daikon radish or something that can really send down even those brassicas. You can even use stuff like potatoes if you really want as a sacrificial crop. You might not get too many actual good sized potatoes out of it, but you're going to allow those roots and the tubers to start burying themselves into that clay layer and breaking it apart. That allows for more moisture to be coming down into the soil. And also, with the worm activity and things like that, it's going to provide some channels in there. The root systems, once they do die out in there, we're not going to be ripping them up. We want to chop them at the surface, a nice chop and drop. You're going to get those root systems breaking down, and they leave space in the soil as well. So you definitely can use cover crops to break apart clay soil. Something along the lines of some gypsum, some lime, some clay breaker, organic as well. That might help alongside when you're terminating these crops or watering them in. But yeah, rather than getting your fork in there and getting your back into it, then I would definitely consider using a cover crop for that method. Is there such thing as a pollinator-friendly cover crop mix, and can it double as a habitat patch? Um, that's a great question that I was asked afterwards. Like, can you leave cover crops to have them as a bit of a habitat spot for pollinators? And absolutely you can. I would use a nice diverse mix. Most of the ones that I've included in the number two blend on the website, you can find are flowering varieties. So a lot of them will go to flower eventually, and they are going to keep reproducing a lot of flowers. Things like your clover and things like this. Even woolly pod vetch has a nice flower. I really like that one. So yeah, even including something like sunflower seeds as well into your mix might help bring in some more pollinators. You can even choose certain flowers to throw in amongst yours, like marigolds and certain things. So a diverse cover crop, let it go to seed, let it self seed and create a little bit of a bed. And of course, you can use that for habitat. I think that's an excellent, excellent idea. So now we might move on to integrated pest management. I've got a few questions related to pests and the whole process of IPM. Obviously, go and check out the talk if you want to hear the full rundown on IPM. But one of the main things that we talk about with IPM is it's more about prevention, regular checkups, so that we don't have to go in with our pest control and be spraying things and getting rid of stuff. But let's jump into some questions and see what we can come up with. So, first one, how do I know if I'm helping or hurting my IPM plan when I squish aphids by hand or blast them off with a hose? Um, Good question. I think with diversity, we want certain things to have populations in the garden without having them grow too much. So, for instance, ladybugs love aphids. So, if you've got aphids around, it's going to attract the ladybugs. So then you've got more beneficials in your garden. However, squishing them by hand obviously is going to kill them. It's going to remove them as a pest and it's going to reduce their numbers. Blasting them off with a hose can be debatable. Sometimes they'll survive, sometimes they won't. But blasting them off, usually you might see ants coming and farming the aphids. This typically happens a lot on, well, actually on a lot of things, citrus primarily, I guess, where it brings in these ants. They'll bring the aphids up to where the leaf is, where they need them to do all the sap sucking, and then they trade this relationship with the aphids so they can get some benefits out of it as well. It's a very clever technique they've used to work together, but usually if you're seeing clusters of ants and aphids, you know that they're being farmed for that reason. So if you blast them off with a hose, instantly they might be brought up by the ants. So one to think about, but for the most part, they're not going to survive from either method, and you're going to be doing your part. I think that's a good thing. Next question. What's a real life example where a gardener introduced a trap crop like nasturtiums for aphids and it actually worked? Well, I can give you a real life example because I have done it myself. I've used nasturtiums quite a bit as a trap plant. I've also used certain plants, even like cordyline specifically. It was a red cordyline that I used in the garden, and that drew away a lot of the grasshoppers that were tending to eat some of the other crops that were in the garden. The nasturtiums too, they seem to get smashed. And then there's quite a few bugs that like nasturtiums, but they also have that flower, so they can bring in the pollinators. They can have the ladybugs and all of these other predatory insects going in and feeding on those pests that have been drawn across to the nasturtiums. But I can tell you for real world experience, it definitely works for me. I've tried it quite a few times, and I love to have nasturtiums in the garden for that reason. They're also great self-seeders, so pretty much once you plant one nasturtium plant and you let it go, full gangbusters, basically, it'll self-seed and keep popping up everywhere. So you'll be with nasturtiums forever. So that one, hopefully that answers your question. I've definitely used it, so give it a go yourself. I highly recommend that. How can I make my own DIY insect monitoring traps using stuff I already have in the house? Um, Look, there are so many recipes online for homemade traps, and to be honest, there's a lot of debate whether they actually work or not. There's one where you can use like a little dish of like some dish soap or some apple cider vinegar is a popular one. Sometimes honey to attract like your drain flies and your well, I suppose they are drain flies when they're inside, especially for your indoor plants. They can be really good. But yeah, I would go for maybe your sticky traps. Your sticky traps are probably the most effective. They seem to go and get most of our flying insects, like specifically flies, mosquitoes, and of course fungus gnats. Fungus gnats are one that sticky traps are really good for, especially if you've got indoor plants. They don't look very beautiful once you've got this bright yellow thing that's got all these black dead flies sticking all over it. But the fungus gnats, they are drain flies essentially. But yeah, these are the ones that break down or sit on top of the mulch layer and help break down some of that. They come around when there's a lot of moisture in the mulch layer, and they can get quite annoying and infest your inside plants and things like this. So sticky traps are a wonderful one to go for in that regard. But honestly, YouTube it, have a little look up. There is plenty of things around that you can use or try. I just don't know too much about the effectiveness of some of them. Is companion planting actually part of IPM, or is it just a separate vibe entirely? I don't know why it was said vibe, but that was how it was said to me at the the group meeting. But yes, it can be something quite different because certain companions work well together. For instance, we got the Three Sisters method. This is something that everybody should know about, where you have corn growing up, you have pumpkins or squash typically underneath the corn in the same bed, and then you use your nitrogen fixers like your peas or your beans to grow up. And this symbiotic relationship of the three of them work really well in terms of feeding each other and controlling pest and disease and keeping overall health in the soil. This one's been proven over time that it definitely does help, and there are certain combinations that do work really well, like your tomatoes and your basil, especially when they're grown next to each other in the same bed, do tend to have somewhat of a improved effect. Now, when you are solely relying on companion planting, it seems to sort of fall by the wayside. I think, again, this is where diversity comes in. This is where diversity is key. And this is where interplanting, intercropping, and having a nice wide variety of fruits, vegetables, herbs, flowers, and all of the above in the same bed, all intermingled, gives you the best result for the soil because there's more diversity, there's more food, and there's basically everything can feed from the buffet. So that's probably my best advice in terms of companion planting. It kind of is part of IPM, but it's also kind of its own separate thing as well. How do I know when to terminate my cover crop? This one is I missed before from cover crop. What's the best method to do it in a backyard setting? This totally depends on you and how able-bodied you are and what sort of method you are aiming for. So if we're going for a green manure mulch, which is chop and drop basically back on the soil, your best bet is to either go through with some sort of machete, scissors, knife, scythe, or whatever it's called, and come through and slice just above the soil layer and chop and drop everything down. Now, if you've got quite a few in-ground beds and you've got a lot of bending down to do and chopping and dropping and things like this, you can also do what's called crimping, which essentially is flattening it. So you use something heavy. You can even walk on it. You can use like planks of wood and basically squash the whole thing down. You can even use plastic or cardboard and things like this to really smother it down if you want to as well. Again, if you've got the opportunity, mowing it can be quite good. So just nice and low over the top of the garden bed. Just be careful about how much that is going to compact your soil. But essentially, there's some really, really easy ways. It just depends on you and what works best for you in your garden with your physicality and all of that. So hopefully that helps. Now, that wraps up another episode. Thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. Remember, you can follow me on TikTok to be live watching these episodes again. You can be asking questions. You can be joining in, seeing the process behind the scenes. So thank you to everyone on TikTok that has joined me again today. And yeah, if you have a question, leave it in the comments, send me a message, anything that you want to do, I will find that question and I'll bring it into the show and make sure we try and answer it as best as possible. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again soon and have a great day. Have a great time in your gardens and enjoy yourselves. All right. See you soon.